Some stories survive because they were written down. Others survive because the people who lived them refused, absolutely refused, to be forgotten. This is one of the latter. And the woman at the center of it, she didn't just survive. She made everyone who underestimated her watch. Pay attention.
The morning after her husband's funeral, Nora Morris woke up alone in a house that no longer felt like hers. The black dress was still hanging on the wardrobe door. The condolence letters were stacked unopened on the hall table. The fire in the grate had burned down to ash in the night, and no one had come to relight it. That was new. In the 18 months of Nora's marriage to Lord Edmund Morris, there had always been someone. A housekeeper. A footman. A maid who appeared without being asked and handled the small mechanical kindnesses of a well-run house. But the morning after the funeral, the house was very, very quiet. It took her 3 hours to understand why. The solicitor arrived at 10. He was a careful man, the sort who chose his words the way other men chose weapons, deliberately, and with an eye toward minimal personal exposure. He sat across from Nora at the drawing room table and explained, with great professional gentleness, that her late husband's estate had been structured in a way that she was perhaps not fully aware of, that the house, the accounts, the income, all of it had reverted upon Lord Morris's death to his family trust. That Nora's position as his widow entitled her to a letter of reference and 30 days' grace in the residence. 30 days. She was 24 years old. She had no family left. She had no independent income. She had been a schoolmaster's daughter before Edmund Morris had noticed her at a summer assembly and upended everything. She had 30 days in a black dress and a stack of letters she hadn't opened. She did not cry in front of the solicitor. She thanked him for his time, showed him to the door, closed it behind him, and stood in the hallway for a long moment with her hand flat against the wood. Then she walked to the drawing room, sat down at the desk, and began to think. She would think of something. She always had. But she did not know in that cold, quiet morning that she was already carrying the one thing that would change everything. She would not know for another 3 weeks. And by the time she did, by the time she understood the full size of what she was carrying and what it would mean, the Duke of Harrowfield would already have moved on. Kai Middleton, the man her husband had called his closest friend, the man who had barely looked at her at the funeral, the man who was, by the time Nora had found her feet and built a new life, reportedly engaged to someone else entirely. She was gone from that world. He had stayed, and the world had kept turning for him without interruption, until the autumn evening, 6 years later, when Nora Morris walked into Lady Ashbourne's drawing room with 2 children at her side, and Kai Middleton looked up. And everything stopped. What you are about to hear was known in drawing rooms from London to Edinburgh, and deliberately suppressed in all of them, because the families involved had spent years constructing a version of events that was cleaner, more convenient, and entirely untrue. They were very good at it. They had practice. What they were not prepared for, what none of them had accounted for, was a woman who had spent 6 years raising 2 children alone, building a life from nothing, and learning, in that time, exactly how little she owed the people who had let her fall. If you want to know what Nora Morris did when she walked back into that room, subscribe now. Turn on every notification, because this is not a story about a woman who waited to be rescued. It is a story about a woman who came back ready. And the difference between those 2 things is everything. England, 1881. The world of English aristocracy is a machine that runs on appearances. What you own, who you marry, what is whispered about you at the right dinner tables, these are the currencies that matter. Sentiment is a luxury. Circumstance is a sentence. Nora Morris, née Nora Ashby, daughter of a schoolmaster, wife of a lord for 18 months and a widow for every day since, had understood this for a long time. She had understood it from the beginning, if she was honest with herself. She had simply believed for a brief and luminous period that love was strong enough to make it irrelevant. She had married Edmund Morris at 22. He had been kind and clever and genuinely fond of her in the way people are fond of rare things they have been fortunate enough to find. He had not told her about the estate structure. Whether through omission or oversight or the quiet optimism of a man who did not believe he would die at 31, she would never know. What she knew was that he was gone, and she was alone. And the world had not paused for a single moment to accommodate either of those facts. She had found in those first terrible weeks a clarity that came only through necessity. She could not afford grief as a sustained occupation. She had practical problems that required practical solutions. She solved them. She found a cottage in the village of Wrenhollow, 40 miles from London, with a modest income from a small inheritance her father had left in trust, and 3 rooms that faced east and received the morning light without apology. She built something there, small, careful, and entirely her own. And then, 6 weeks into her new and solitary life, she discovered she was not solitary at all. 2 heartbeats. The midwife had pressed her hands to Nora's abdomen and said it with the practiced calm of a woman who had delivered this particular piece of news many times. 2. Nora had sat with that word for a long time before she could speak. She thought about writing to Kai Middleton. She thought about it for 3 days. Kai had been Edmund's closest friend, his oldest ally, the man who had stood beside him at their wedding, who had spent every Christmas at Harrowfield with the Morrises for as long as Nora had known either of them. He would want to know. He would almost certainly insist on helping. And that, in the end, was why she didn't write. She did not want Kai Middleton's help. She did not want his charity, his complicated guilt about Edmund, his aristocratic assumption that he knew what was best for her. She was not, and had never been, a problem for someone else to solve. She would do this herself. She did. Her daughters were born in March, Beatrice first, then Elise 4 minutes later. They arrived in the world with their father's dark hair and their mother's stubborn jaw, and they were the most singular thing Nora had ever seen. She held them in the blue morning light of the cottage bedroom and understood, with the particular certainty of new parents, that she would spend the rest of her life making sure they had everything. She kept her word, 6 years of it. And then, in October of 1887, Lady Ashbourne invited her to dinner. Nora had not wanted to go. She had sat at her writing desk in the cottage for 20 minutes with the invitation in her hand, reading it twice as though it might contain different information on a second pass. Lady Ashbourne was one of the few society connections Nora had maintained since her marriage, a warm, formidable woman of 60 who had taken a liking to Nora at a long-ago assembly and had continued, with magnificent disregard for social convention, to treat her as a person of consequence regardless of her circumstances. The invitation was for a small autumn dinner. 10 guests. Comfortable and unpretentious, Clara Ashbourne had written in her decisive hand. Do come, my dear. You have been in that cottage long enough. The girls will be quite all right with Mrs. Fenn for an evening. It was the second page of the guest list that made Nora hesitate. The Duke of Harrowfield will be in attendance. She set the letter down, picked it up again, set it back down. Kai Middleton. She had not seen him since Edmund's funeral, had not spoken to him, had not written, had in fact spent 6 years ensuring that their paths did not cross, which had not been particularly difficult given that his world and hers no longer shared much geography. She had heard things, in the way one hears things when one has the right acquaintances, that he had eventually returned to society after a long absence following Edmund's death, that Harrowfield had been renovated, that he had been seen at functions with increasing frequency over the past 2 years, that there was talk, the particular, persistent kind of talk, of an engagement to Lady Cecily Vane, daughter of the Earl of Somerford. Nora told herself, firmly and repeatedly, that none of this was any of her concern. It wasn't. She went to the dinner. The girls were dressed before she left, both of them in white with blue ribbons, both standing at the cottage gate to wave her off, both radiating an energy that suggested Mrs. Fenn would earn her evening's pay. Elise waved with her whole arm. Bea stood very straight and gave a single dignified nod that was so like her father that Nora had to look away. The Ashbourne house was well lit and warm, with voices already audible from the front step. Nora gave her coat to the footman, smoothed her gloves, and walked into the drawing room. 8 people in the room. She catalogued them in the practiced way she had learned to do in the years of her marriage, when social navigation had been a required skill rather than an optional one. She found him on her second pass. He was standing near the window, half-turned, talking to a man she didn't recognize. He was taller than she remembered, or perhaps she had simply stopped remembering correctly after 6 years. He had the same quality he'd always had, the particular quality of people who have spent their entire lives being the most considered person in any room, but it sat differently on him now. Heavier, less easy. He turned and their eyes met. The room did not stop. Rooms don't actually stop. But something shifted in the air between them, a recognition that moved through Nora like cold water, sharp and unavoidable. Kai Middleton went very still. She had prepared for this. She had rehearsed it in the carriage all the way from Wren Hollow. She would be composed, warm, and entirely fine. She would inquire politely about Harrowfield. She would compliment Lady Ashbourne's table arrangement. She would, under no circumstances, let him see anything at all. She crossed the room and offered her hand. "Your Grace," she said, "it has been some time." He took her hand. His grip was careful, controlled. "Mrs. Morris," he said. His voice was exactly as she remembered, and she hated that. "Yes, it has." A pause settled between them like a stone in still water. "You look well," he said. "Thank you." She withdrew her hand. "So do you." They were saved from having to continue by Lady Ashbourne appearing at Nora's elbow with a glass of wine, and the specific social genius of a woman who had hosted dinners for 40 years and could recognize a conversation that needed redirecting from across the room. Nora spent the dinner being entirely fine. She ate. She spoke. She laughed at the right moments and asked intelligent questions and was, by any external measurement, a perfectly comfortable guest. She did not look at Kai Middleton more than was polite. She looked at him exactly 7 times because she was counting, and she was almost certain he was counting too. After dinner in the drawing room, Lady Cecily Vane spoke to her. She was young, younger than Nora had expected, with a warm smile and the unconscious ease of a woman who had never had a practical problem in her life that she was required to solve herself. She was very beautiful and very kind and clearly completely devoted to the Duke of Harrowfield, whose name she introduced into every third sentence with the practiced naturalness of someone who doesn't yet know they're doing it. Nora smiled and listened, and was extremely, precisely, correctly fine. She left before the last carriage. She thanked Lady Ashbourne with genuine warmth and walked out into the October night and stood on the front steps and took a very long breath. "Mrs. Morris." She did not turn immediately. She composed herself first, a habit she had developed over 6 years of situations that required it. Then she turned. Kai Middleton stood in the doorway, his coat in his hand, looking at her with an expression she couldn't immediately name. Not the polished social neutral of the drawing room, something more unguarded. "I owe you an apology," he said. "After Edmund. I didn't." He stopped, began again. I should have made sure you were all right. Nora looked at him steadily. I was. I know. I heard. Then I hope the apology has brought you some comfort, she said pleasantly. Good night, Your Grace. She walked to her carriage. She did not look back. The day after the dinner, Nora woke early and sat with her tea in the cottage kitchen, watching her daughters eat breakfast. Bea ate methodically, her spoon moving in precise arcs, her dark hair still loosely plaited from the night before. Elise ate catastrophically, with the enthusiasm of someone who regarded breakfast as a full-contact pursuit. They were 6 years old, and they were, Nora thought for approximately the 10,000th time, the most extraordinary people she had ever encountered. Mrs. Fenn said we stayed up too late, Elise reported, not looking up from her porridge. Did you? Only a little. Bea set down her spoon. She fell asleep on the hearthrug, and I had to wake her up for bed. I did not, Elise said. You were snoring. I was resting my eyes. Elise looked at her sister with great dignity. There is a difference. Nora smiled into her tea. This was her life, and she had made it herself, and she loved it with the specific, earned fierceness of someone who knew what the alternative looked like. But the dinner sat with her through the morning. Kai Middleton's face. The look on it when she had turned and found him in the doorway. I should have made sure you were all right. He had not. She had understood in the months after Edmund's death that he wouldn't. Kai had his own grief. Edmund had been his oldest friend, and grief makes people retreat, not advance. She had not blamed him for it, but she had noted it carefully and filed it away in the cabinet of things she was not going to depend on. She had not told him about the girls. She had told herself over the years that this was a practical decision, that there was nothing he could do, that his involvement would complicate things, that the girls were hers, and she was not going to have them grow up as an aristocrat's charitable obligation. She still believed all of those things. But sitting in the kitchen watching Elise argue the metaphysical distinction between sleeping and resting, she felt something she had not felt in a long time. Uncertainty. The girls were 6. They were beginning to ask questions. They had already asked, with the particular precision of children who have noticed an absence and want it explained, why they didn't have a father. Nora had answered in the honest, measured way she answered most of their questions. Your father was a wonderful man who loved you very much, and he died before he knew about you, and that was a great sadness for everyone. This had satisfied Elise for approximately 48 hours before she produced a follow-up question. But if he was wonderful, wouldn't he have wanted us to know other wonderful people who loved him? Nora had paused in the middle of braiding her hair. That's very thoughtful, she had said carefully. I know, Elise said. The follow-up question had not gone away. It sat in the background of Nora's daily life, patient and inevitable, waiting for the moment she would have to answer it properly. 2 days after the Ashbourne dinner, a letter arrived. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, formal, careful, the kind of hand taught in a schoolroom rather than developed in personal correspondence. She opened it. Dear Mrs. Morris, I hope this letter finds you well. I am writing at the request of His Grace the Duke of Harrowfield, who wishes to convey his sincere hope that you will permit him to call at a time convenient to you. He has some matters he would wish to discuss personally if you are agreeable. Yours faithfully, Mr. Alderton, Secretary to the Duke of Harrowfield. Nora read it twice. Then she wrote back. Dear Mr. Alderton, please convey to His Grace that I am not at present receiving visitors. I wish him well. Yours sincerely, Mrs. N. Morris. She sealed it, posted it. Consider the matter closed. He came anyway. Not immediately. He waited a respectful 4 days, which she supposed was meant to signal that he was not a man who disregarded stated preferences entirely, merely one who ultimately disregarded them. She was in the garden with both girls when his carriage appeared at the end of the lane. Elise saw it first. She pointed. "Mama, someone is coming." Nora looked up. She recognized the crest on the carriage door from 6 years of Christmas visits to Edmund's study, where Kai's correspondence had always sat stacked to the left of the inkwell. Her hands went still in the soil. "Girls," she said, keeping her voice very even. "Go inside with Mrs. Fenn, please." "Why?" Elise asked. "Because I'm asking you to." Bea studied her mother's face with those dark, watchful eyes. Then she took her sister's hand and walked toward the door without argument. Elise went, which was unusual enough to indicate that even she had felt the shift in the air. Nora stood up, stripped her gardening gloves, and turned to face the lane. Kai Middleton got out of the carriage looking, she thought, like a man who was fully aware he had done something inadvisable and had decided to do it anyway on principle. He walked up the garden path. He stopped a careful distance from her. He looked at her with an expression that was not apologetic exactly. It was more the expression of someone who has decided that honesty is the correct strategy, even when it is also the uncomfortable one. "You wrote that you were not receiving visitors," Nora said. "You did. And yet." "And yet?" he agreed. He did not look away from her face. "I needed to speak with you, and I thought if I waited for you to be ready, I would wait indefinitely." Nora considered this. It was, she admitted to herself, accurate. "What do you need to say?" "A number of things." He paused, looked at the cottage, at the garden, at the evidence of the life she had built here, and something moved across his face that she couldn't read. "May I come in?" She was going to say no. She had every reasonable justification. But the question settled in front of her, and she stood there in the garden and looked at him. Really looked at him, the way she had been carefully not doing since the Ashbourne dinner. And she found, underneath the composed exterior and the aristocratic bearing and 6 years of strategic distance, that she was tired. Not of him specifically, of the effort. "5 minutes," she said. "In the garden. Mrs. Fenn is watching." He almost smiled. Of course. They sat at the small iron table near the rose bed. Roses past their season now, their leaves turned and dry in the October cold. Nora poured nothing. She folded her hands and waited. "I loved Edmund," Kai said without preamble, "more than anyone else in my life. When he died, I didn't manage it well. I went away. I didn't look after the things he would have wanted me to look after." His jaw tightened slightly. "Including you. I didn't require looking after. I know that now. I should have known it then." He looked at the rosebed. After a while it became easier to stay away. You had clearly managed. Asking to be let in seemed... He stopped. Presumptuous. Nora looked at him steadily. "Is that all?" "No." He met her eyes. "Cecily Vane and I are not engaged." The silence that followed was extremely careful on both their parts. "I wasn't aware that concerned me," Nora said. "There was talk." "There is always talk." "The talk was not entirely inaccurate," he said slowly. "Her family had expectations." "I had been..." A pause. "I had been trying for several years to want what seemed practical. She is perfectly lovely. It would have been a sensible arrangement." He looked at her directly. "I ended it 2 weeks ago, before the Ashbourne dinner." Nora's heart was doing something she had firmly instructed it not to do. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," he said quietly, "you are the reason I couldn't go through with it. And I think I owe you the honesty of that. Whatever you do with it." The words sat between them in the October air. Nora looked at the dead roses. She thought about Edmund, about 18 months of a marriage she had loved, about the morning after his funeral and the 30 days' notice and 3 rooms that faced east. She thought about two small, dark-haired girls, currently being very well behaved inside the cottage, who asked questions that were becoming harder to answer. She thought about 6 years of doing everything correctly. She said, "Your Grace." "Kai," he said, "you've called me Kai since the second Christmas I spent at Edmund's house. You told me the formality was giving you a headache." Nora felt something in her chest that was almost involuntarily laughter. "That sounds accurate?" It was. He looked at her. "How are you, Nora? Not, how have you managed? How are you?" It was the question no one had asked her, not in 6 years. The practical questions, the logistical questions, the social questions, those she had fielded constantly, but not this one. She opened her mouth, closed it. Bea turned and looked at him. Then she did something Nora had not seen her do before. She reached out and took Kai's hand. Kai went very still. He looked down at the small hand in his, then at Bea's face. "Thank you for telling us," Bea said. Elise, who had been watching all of this, decided at that moment that the correct response was to also take Kai's other hand. This was characteristic. Nora looked at the portrait of Edmund and felt, for the first time in a long time, that he was not absent from the room. Later in the library, while the girls were in the garden with Alderton, Kai spoke. "I need to tell you something," he said. "About Edmund." She turned. His expression had changed, quieter, more careful, weighted with the particular gravity of someone about to say something they have been carrying for a long time. "The month before he died," Kai said slowly, "Edmund wrote to me. He was worried about the estate structure. He had realized, too late, he said, that the arrangement left you unprotected. He was trying to change it. He had engaged a solicitor to draft new documents. The family blocked it." Nora went very still. "They blocked it," she said. "They had legal grounds, technically. He was ill. They argued capacity." Kai's voice was entirely controlled. "By the time I understood what had happened, you had already gone. And He stopped, started again. "I did not fight for you. I should have. I had the standing to contest it. I didn't because I told myself it was not my place, and that was—" His jaw tightened. That was cowardice dressed as courtesy. The drawing room was very quiet. "Why are you telling me this now?" Nora asked. "Because you deserved to know 6 years ago, and I cannot undo that, but I can tell you now." He met her eyes. "And because I intend to be someone you can count on, if you'll allow it. Not out of obligation to Edmund. For my own reasons." The fire in the grate ticked. Outside, they could hear Elise in the garden announcing something to Alderton with great intensity. Nora looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "The Morris family. The solicitor's letter. You managed it in 4 days." "Yes." "Could you have managed it in 4 days 6 years ago?" "Yes." She nodded once, looked at the fire, nodded again, slower. "Then I am very glad," she said carefully, "that you are here now." The Morris family, it turned out, was not finished. The second letter arrived 3 weeks after the first had been legally dispatched. This one was not from a solicitor. This one was from Lord Morris's eldest nephew, a man named Aldred Voss, who had inherited the family's social authority along with its tendency toward strategic unpleasantness, and it was addressed not to Nora, but to Kai. Nora saw it because Kai brought it to her. He arrived at the cottage in the late morning without sending ahead, which meant something had happened. He set the letter on the kitchen table between them. She read it. It was direct in the way that genuinely threatening things are often direct. Aldred Voss had heard, through the particular information networks of English aristocracy, that the Duke of Harrowfield was spending time at Wrenhollow with Edmund Morris's widow and her children. He wished to make clear that any formal association between the Duke and Mrs. Morris's daughters would be seen by the Morris family as a challenge to their position and would be contested accordingly. The letter was careful enough to make no explicit legal threats. It did not need to. The implication was sufficient. The message was, "Stay away from her, or this gets unpleasant for everyone." Nora read it twice. She set it down. "How unpleasant can they make it?" she asked. "They can make it public," Kai said. He was very controlled, which meant he was angry. "The girl's parentage. They could put the question in public circulation. It would be damaging." "To the girls?" "Yes." Nora sat with this. The fire burned. Mrs. Fenn was upstairs. The girls were at school. "What do you want to do?" Kai asked. She looked at him. It was, she thought, the right question. Not what should we do, not what would be sensible, but what do you want to do? He was asking her, not managing it for her. "I want to remove the threat," she said, "permanently." He nodded. "Then I have an idea, but you would need to agree to it." She waited. "If the girl's parentage is formally established, documented, attested, legally grounded, the Morris family has nothing to threaten you with. The question is no longer open." He paused. "I can help you do that, with my solicitors, through proper channels. It would require a formal statement from you about Edmund. It would be thorough and it would be final. And Aldred Voss cannot contest what is already established in law." Kai looked at her steadily. "It would also require, given the correspondence he has sent to me, a public response. Something that makes clear that any attempt to pursue this further will be understood as an attack on the daughters of a man I considered my closest friend and will be treated accordingly." A pause. "You are proposing," Nora said carefully, "to make this personal." "I am proposing," Kai said, "to make it clear." She thought about Bea at the kitchen table with the letter in front of her. She thought about Elise in the portrait room, looking up at her father's face. She thought about 6 years of managing everything carefully, quietly, without drawing attention, and the specific fatigue of doing exactly the right thing in exactly the right way and discovering that it did not protect you anyway. "Do it," she said. He did. The public letter that appeared in 3 separate correspondence columns the following week was, by the standards of such things, remarkably unambiguous. It did not name Aldred Voss directly. It did not need to. It stated, with the measured clarity of a man who has chosen every word carefully and means all of them, that the Duke of Harrowfield considered the daughters of Lord Edmund Morris to be under his personal protection, that their mother was a woman of the highest character, and that any challenge to either of those facts would be met with the full resources available to the Harrowfield estate. Aldred Voss did not respond. The drawing rooms of London talked about the letter for approximately 2 weeks before something more interesting replaced it. Nora heard about it secondhand from Lady Ashbourne, who wrote with barely concealed delight that it was quite the most direct thing anyone had put in a correspondence column since 1874, and that she had always known the Duke had the right instincts. Nora folded Lady Ashbourne's letter and put it in the drawer that had once held the solicitor's threat. That evening she told the girls about it. Not all of it, but the essential part, that some people had been unkind, and someone had stood up and said they were wrong. "The Duke?" Elise asked immediately. "Yes." Elise looked at her sister. Bea looked back. Some communication passed between them in the specific wordless language of twins that Nora had been unable to decode for 6 years. "He's our person," Elise announced with the finality of a verdict. "Elise!" "He is," Bea confirmed. Quietly, but without any uncertainty at all. Nora looked at her daughters. She thought about what Edmund had written, "The best man I ever knew." She thought about a portrait in a long room, and a small hand reaching out, and the particular quality of a man who answers children's questions as though the questions matter because they do. "Yes," she said, "I think he is." Elise Morris has declared the Duke of Harrowfield to be their person, with the absolute authority of a 6-year-old who has made up her mind and expects the universe to comply. Beatrice has confirmed it. Nora has agreed. The only person who has not yet formally weighed in on his own situation is Kai Middleton himself. Subscribe, because what he says next is the most important thing anyone says in this entire story, and it is not what you think. He asked her in the garden, not formally, or rather formally in his manner, but not in his setting. He did not produce a ring in a drawing room. He did not arrange a dinner. He came to the cottage on a December morning when the garden was silver with frost and the girls were at their lessons indoors and Nora was outside for no reason except that she had needed the cold air, and he walked up the path looking like a man who has made a decision and is committed to it entirely. "I need to say something," he said, without preamble. "And I need you to let me say all of it before you respond." She looked at him steadily. "All right." He took a breath. "I have been in love with you since the second Christmas at Edmund's house, when you told me the formal address was giving you a headache and then made me help you move a bookcase because you thought it looked better on the other wall." Nora stared at him. "I knew it was wrong," he continued, with the specific composure of someone who has rehearsed this and is determined to deliver it. "Edmund was my closest friend. You were his wife. I never said anything. I never acted on it. I simply managed it." She could not speak. "When Edmund died, I did not come to you because I was not able to be useful to you in the way I should have been. I was afraid of myself, afraid that my reasons for helping you would not be what they should have been, so I did nothing. And that was cowardly, and it was wrong, and it caused you harm, and I will carry the weight of it for the rest of my life." The frost in the garden crackled. Somewhere inside the cottage, Elise was reading aloud at high volume. "He knew," Kai said. "Edmund." He met her eyes. "He told me, the last Christmas, that he had never once doubted me, that he knew how I felt, and that he trusted me absolutely. He told me—" His voice for the first time became slightly less controlled. "He told me that if something happened to him, he wanted me to look after you, that you would not ask for it and would not accept it if it came from obligation, but that he hoped I would find a way." The silence was enormous. "He knew," Nora said finally. "He knew." She thought about Edmund, about the way he had always known things quietly, without making them into events, about the letter he had been writing, the estate documents he had been trying to change, the friend he had trusted with the information. "He was protecting me," she said. "The same way I was trying to protect the girls." "Yes. By not telling me. He thought you would run from it." Kai looked at her. "He thought if you knew I was in love with you, you would feel obligated to manage my feelings, so he kept it, and he made me keep it." She breathed in cold December air. She thought about 6 years of a cottage and 3 rooms facing east, and 2 daughters who had grown up knowing that the person who loved them most was also the person who was entirely capable of managing anything. She thought about Bee's hand reaching out for Kai's in the portrait room. She thought about what Elise had said. "He's our person." "What are you asking me?" she said. "I am asking if I may be something to you and to the girls, not as an obligation, not as a tribute to Edmund, because I want to." He looked at her without flinching. "Because Bee told me I had kind eyes and Elise has told me her opinions on approximately 40 different subjects, and I would like to hear the remaining opinions. Because you moved a bookcase at 11 o'clock at night 6 years ago, and I have never entirely recovered from it." A pause. "And because I am better with you in the world than without you in it." I have tested this over 6 years, and the data is conclusive. Nora was quiet for a long moment. The data is conclusive, she repeated. Thoroughly. She looked at the frost on the rosebed. She looked at the cottage. She looked at Kai Middleton standing in her garden in December, looking at her as though she were the only fixed point in his entire compass. "Come in," she said. "I'll put the kettle on." He followed her in. The girls looked up from their books. Elise took in his expression with the lightning speed she applied to any information she considered important. "Mama said yes," she announced to her sister. "I didn't say anything yet," Nora said. "You smiled," Elise said with total confidence. "That's the same thing." Bea looked at Kai, then at her mother, then back at Kai. "Good," she said simply. They were married in the spring, at the church in Wren Hollow, with 12 guests and the girls as witnesses, a role Elise undertook with such theatrical solemnity that several guests had to conceal laughter behind their order of service sheets, and Bea undertook with the quiet, clear-eyed seriousness she brought to everything that mattered. Lady Ashbourne cried. She denied it to everyone who asked. Alderton, who had carried every letter between Harrowfield and the cottage for the past 7 months with increasing frequency and what he believed was complete professional discretion, allowed himself a single satisfied nod when the register was signed. The girls took the Harrowfield name. There was no contest, no legal complication, no further word from Aldred Voss, who had apparently concluded that the correct strategy was to pretend the entire episode had not occurred. No one challenged this. A year later, Nora sat at the writing desk in the library at Harrowfield, a library that had been rearranged to Kai's mild alarm and genuine delight the week after their arrival, and wrote a long letter to a charitable foundation she had been building for 3 years. Its work was straightforward. Resources for widowed women in the immediate aftermath of loss, legal information, financial guidance, the specific, practical knowledge that nobody had given Nora the morning after her husband's funeral, when she had sat at the drawing room table and been told she had 30 days. It was not a sweeping reform. It was not legislation. It was a door being left open by someone who knew what it cost to find it closed. She signed the letter, sealed it, and looked up. Kai was in the doorway with a cup of tea and the expression of a man who has walked in on his wife doing something she considers important and is not going to interrupt. "How is it going?" he asked. "Well," she said. She accepted the tea. "We have 12 women in correspondence this quarter. 2 of them have found independent housing. 1 has a legal case we are supporting." He sat down. He listened. He always listened, which was, she had come to understand, the thing she had needed most and found in the least expected place. "Edmund would be proud of you," he said. "He would be proud of both of us," she said. From somewhere deep in the house, Elise shouted something at a volume that suggested the situation was urgent. Bea's voice answered, lower, calmer, the voice of someone managing an emergency they consider manageable. Normal, in other words, entirely and completely normal. Kai stood. "I'll go." "You always go," she said, amused. "She's louder than she sounds," he said. "It echoes in these corridors." He was already moving. She watched him go, this man who had loved her quietly and incorrectly and too long and had found his way to her through the most circuitous possible route. And she thought about 6 years of managing everything alone, and how the lesson she had learned from it was not that she had been wrong to manage, it was that she had been wrong to believe that managing alone was the same as strength. Strength, she had discovered, was knowing the difference between walls that protect and walls that simply keep out the cold. She had knocked a few of them down. It turned out there was more room inside without them. She turned back to her letter, and outside the library window, The Harrowfield garden was coming into its spring, slow and deliberate and entirely worth the wait. They called it a scandal briefly. The widow with the children, the duke who defended her in print, the marriage that produced, by general consensus, entirely too much noise from the direction of the nursery for the dignity of the estate. They talked about it in drawing rooms for precisely the amount of time drawing rooms talk about things. Then something else happened, as it always does, and they moved on. But the foundation Nora Morris built, which later became the Harrowfield Women's Legal Aid Society, which is still operating today, they never stopped talking about that, because they never stopped needing it. That is the story of Nora Morris. She did not set out to change things. She simply refused to leave the door closed behind her. That is, in my experience, how most of the important changes are made. If you are still here, and I am glad that you are, subscribe. The next story is already waiting. And I promise you, it is worse than this one before it is better. In conclusion, this story carries core messages and lessons in 3 layered themes: that managing alone is not the same as strength, that love expressed through integrity and patience is more durable than love expressed through grand gesture, and that the doors we leave open for others, Nora's foundation, Kai's public letter, Edmund's quiet arrangements, are the things that outlast us most completely.